In this video, I will try to cover few important graphs which can prove to be very tricky. Let's first understand the graph for substitute goods and complementary goods. Before I start that, I just want to revise one thing. In my previous video where I talked about how to draw a curve or what are the shapes or how to draw curves in economics or what is their interpretation, how to interpret them according to math, I told you that if we want to show positive relationship between the two variables, it's shown like with the upward sloping curve. And if I want to show inverse relationship between the two variables, then I need to use downward sloping curve. You can go back to that video to just revise these concepts, but this will help you to form the basis for understanding these new graphs, and then you don't need to rote learn them. You can just arrive at them logically. So let's first take an example for a substitute good. Now, what are substitute goods? Substitute goods are the goods which can be used in place of one another for satisfaction of a particular want. Like let's take tea and coffee. Now, if I'll try to establish a relationship between demand of tea when the price of coffee goes up. So let's say that price of coffee increases. What will happen to the demand for coffee? Demand for coffee will go down, but demand for tea will increase. Now you want to build a relationship between demand of tea and price of coffee. So what is the relationship between demand of tea and price of coffee in our example? So you have to notice this and this. So both are increasing. Both are increasing, it means there is a positive relationship. So directly, actually, I can say that the curve will be upward sloping curve, which shows that if price of coffee is originally this, the demand for tea is this. So let's say this is your price of coffee and this is your demand of tea. When the price of coffee goes up to OP1, the demand for tea has increased from Q to Q1. So if you know the relationship between the two products, you can directly draw the graphs. You can logically think about it and do it. Similarly, let's take another example for, now these are our substitutes. This is a substitute. Let's do one for complementary goods. Now let's think of an example for complementary. Maybe probably we can take again demand of tea, and let me take price of milk. Milk is a complementary good for tea. So in this case, what is happening? If price of milk goes up, it means demand for milk will go down, but it will also lead to demand for tea going down. So demand for tea also decreases due to price of milk going up. Now let's again compare what are the two things we have to look at? We have to look at price of milk and demand for tea. So if you look at them both, you will see that there is inverse relationship between the two. So automatically my curve should be actually like this to show that inverse relationship. Now let's see whether we have done it correctly or not. So if I say that price of milk is originally this, which is P1, the demand for T is this, which is OQ. Now let's say that the price of milk has increased to P1, P2, then my demand for T has decreased to Q1, from Q to Q1. So what you can see here, there is an inverse relationship between the two. So this also tells us the shapes of the curves. So in this case, in case of substitute goods, we have a positive relationship between demand of the commodity and the price of its substitute. In case of complementary goods, which goods are used together, if the price of one good goes up, it leads to decrease in the demand of the other good. One thing we need to note, that a demand curve shows the relationship between demand curve shows the relationship between quantity demanded and price of a given commodity. These are not demand curves. These are just showing the relationship between demand for the given commodity and price of a related good. It is not of the same good. So demand curve would have been when we are looking at quantity demanded and price of the same good. But in the above examples, in the above two graphs, note that these are not the demand curves. So when you get these type of diagrams, you should first pay attention to what is there on the OX axis, what is there on the OY axis. Like both the diagrams, make a note of that. Is it price of T on the OY axis? No, it's the price of either complementary good or price of a substitute good. The above two diagrams, which we have studied right now, they are also known as examples for cross demand. Cross demand refers to the relationship between the demand of a given commodity and the price of related goods, when we assume other things to remain constant. So what we are trying to say, the demand of one commodity X is a function of price of the related good, which can be the case of a substitute good or a complementary goods. And we also learned that it can be positive or negative. Positive in case of substitute goods, which we did here in this diagram, and negative it is in case of complementary goods. So in case of substitute goods, because demand for the commodity, given commodity, varies directly with the price of substitute goods. It is negative in case of complementary goods, as we took in the example of milk and tea. Demand for tea varies inversely with the price of its complementary good, milk. Now these two diagrams, what we studied now, there we showed the graphs were related to demand of a commodity in relation to the price of the related goods. Next diagram, what we are going to understand is where we are going to look into what would be the cross price effect on the demand curve of the same commodity. For example, in the above example, we understood about tea and price of coffee. But now, if price of coffee goes up, what will happen to the demand curve for tea? That is what we are going to understand in the next section. So this is also known as, here we are trying to understand the cross price effect on demand curve. So cross price effect on demand curve of the same commodity. Like I told you, the above two diagrams are not the demand curves. They are just showing cross demand between two commodities, two related goods. Now we are going to understand the effect on the demand curve of the same commodity. For example, we are saying that price of coffee increases. It means demand for coffee will go down. Price of demand for tea goes up. because price of coffee has increased, people will switch over to tea. But price of tea remains the same. Price of tea has not changed. So how will we show this as a graph in a demand curve? What we are trying to show is you have demand of tea here and we are taking price of tea here. Yes, so it means if our original demand curve with the original prices here, now demand of tea has gone up, but the price remains the same. So price is not changing. Price is remaining same. So in this case, your demand curve will shift to the right. So here, the change in demand is happening not due to change in the price of tea, but it is happening due to change in the price of its substitute good. So this is what is the demand curve of the same good when there is a price increase of substitute goods. So please make sure that you understand what you are taking on OX axis and what you are taking on OY axis. Similarly, if we take the effect of this on complementary goods, what will happen? We say that price of milk goes up. It means demand of milk decreases, but this will lead to demand for tea also going down, though price of tea has not changed. So in this, what is happening? Effect of on demand curve due to increase in price of complementary goods. How will we show? So you have a graph. This is price of tea and demand of tea. When we are showing this relationship, we are showing demand curve here. So your original demand curve is this. Price is same. We are not changing the price. But what is happening here? We can see that price of milk has increased, which has caused demand for tea to reduce. So it means your demand curve will shift to the left. So here also we can see that the increase in price of complementary good has caused the demand curve of the given commodity to shift to the left, which is in our case tea. So this is the difference between when you are looking at a graph. So sometimes you get a question where they are going to just give you a graph and you have to analyze the information. In those type of questions, please note what are we taking on the two axes. Then only try to build the relationship between the graphs, whether it's a case of increase in demand or decrease in demand, whether it's a case of cross demand. All these things we need to keep in mind when we are interpreting our graphs. Now, next important set of graphs is graphs for normal goods and inferior goods. First of all, let's revise what are normal goods. Normal goods refer to those goods whose demand increases with an increase in income. So what we are trying to say, that demand of a commodity is a function of its income. So here we are not taking price on the OY axis. We are going to take income on the OY axis and quantity demanded. Let's take demand of probably TV sets, demand of TV. So as demand of what will happen in the case of normal goods, their demand will increase with an increase in income. That is the definition of normal goods. So it means if income increases, demand increases. Again, same fundamental rule that both have positive relationship. It means your curve should be like this. This is the curve of normal goods. So income effect is positive in case of normal goods. Now let's take the case of inferior goods. What are inferior goods? Inferior goods are those goods whose demand decreases with an increase in income. For example, if the income of a consumer rises, he may prefer to travel by his own car instead of using public transport. So what will happen? The transport facility, the bus transport facility demand will go down. So in this case, if we take demand for bus service and we are taking income on OY axis, not the price. That's one of the major distinction we have to keep in mind when we are drawing curves for inferior goods or normal goods. So in this case, what will happen to the demand curve? If income of a person, if income of people go high, will increase, probably demand for buses would decrease. So there is inverse relationship between the two. So you can even show it through a graph clearly like this, that you have initial income and this is your quantity. If income of the people increase to Y1, the demand for buses would decline. So this is an example. This is a graph for inferior goods. Now let's also understand what would be the effect on the demand curve of the commodity in case of change in income of normal goods. So in case of normal goods, as we took the example above, for TV, if income increases, what we are trying to say that demand curve would be always between price and demand for TV. So in this case, we are saying that the price of the TV is this, that time demand curve is this. But if the person's income increases, and it's a case of normal goods, increase in income would lead to shift in the demand curve to the right. So this is the effect on the demand curve. This diagram is showing us the effect on the demand curve due to change in income, which is a factor other than price, which we usually show through shifts in demand curve. But this diagram, what we learned here is how you depict the relationship between income and demand of TV. So this is, make sure that you understand that here we have income on this axis and here we are taking price on this axis. This is a very common mistake children make. So please make a note of that. Now in case of inferior goods, what will happen? So let's take demand for public bus service and price probably of the ticket for the bus. So in this case, what is happening? That you have same price, your demand curve original is this D, but now if the person's income has increased, people will move, they will reduce the demand for public bus service and they might go to buy cars. So in that case, what will happen? The demand curve of this public bus service would shift to the left. So there will be a decrease in demand this effect on demand curve of this inferior good is due to increase in income of the consumer. You will also come across another diagram somewhat related to income and demand. We also understand about Giffen's paradox or Giffen goods. Now in this case, the graph would be, you will have price here and demand here. Now Giffen goods are again related to, children get confused between Giffen goods and inferior goods. So what are Giffen goods? First let's understand that. So in this case, the Giffen goods are special kind of inferior goods on which the consumer spends a large part of his income and their demand rises with an increase in price and falls with decrease in price. So what is happening here? In this case, when the price of this good goes up, usually the demand of these goods should go down, but that doesn't happen in the case of Giffen goods. Here the relationship between price and demand is positive relationship, which is an exception to law of demand. Law of demand says that as price of a commodity rises, the demand of that good will go down, or vice versa, assuming other factors remain constant. But in case of Giffen goods, these are a special type of inferior goods where the consumer is spending a large part of his income. And I'm going to explain this whole paradox in a separate video. I don't want to do that here, but I just want you to again note that in case of Giffen goods, this is a special graph again. You have price here on y-axis and you have demand here on the x-axis, and there is a positive relationship between price and demand. I wanted to cover this graph along with normal and inferior goods because again children get confused between a diagram for a graph for inferior goods and Giffen goods. With this we cover more or less tricky but important graphs. In my other videos I'll continue with other topics for the demand theory, but I wanted to do this as a separate video so that you can get a hang of what kind of graphs you should pay attention to, what kind of axes we need to label. So if you learn like this with logical explanation, you don't have to rote learn anything. And I feel that will help you to prepare well. I hope this video is helpful. If you find this video useful, kindly like, follow and subscribe to my channel where you can find more videos on various topics. You can also visit my website for blogs related to relevant topics. Hope to see you soon. Bye.